Through all this experience with M&A in the last 10 years, for the practitioner who's watching this, what are the one or two things, and perhaps their company is either considering a merger or an acquisition, or they're in the middle of it, what advice would you give?
The number one thing you have to do during an acquisition is communicate. When you're acquiring a new company, those employees are back to, as I call it, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. They want to know, do I have a job, how much I'm being paid, and what are my benefits? You may not know that right away, so it's important just at least to reach out and say, we are going to communicate to you on this date, so they know when that date is coming, because in their mind they're building up a worst case scenario, and that worst case scenario is probably way worse than anything that's going to happen, and you want them to stop building up that scenario and wait for your communication. When I get in front of people during an acquisition or even an open enrollment session, I tell them, I'm going to tell you the good, the bad, and the ugly. I'm going to tell you the truth. I'm not going to try to hide anything. I'm not going to try to sell you and make it sound better than it really is. I'm just going to tell you the truth. And then we will work through your questions on each of those. Truly, truthful communication is the only way that you build trust. And you need that trust for people to know that can come and ask you questions, because the worst thing you can have is silent dissension, where they're just being quiet and they're nodding and they're smiling at you, but then they're going back to their offices and going, oh, I don't like this at all, and this is just not acceptable. Especially in compensation and benefits, our role is to retain people, right? We want to retain, especially your key people that are the reason you acquired that company, their knowledge, their talents. You want to make sure you're retaining that base of employees that you just paid all that money to acquire. We need to make sure that we're hearing, because if we don't hear what their concerns are, we can't address them. So communication is really the key. The earlier, the better.
Communication, number one. Is there a second or third, perhaps, lesson that you've learned from all these various acquisitions?
The second thing I would say is, again, remember to ask why something exists in comp and benefits. That's the biggest implication. If you don't know why that allowance exists, if you don't know why that benefit exists, and you make assumptions that it's not needed or it can be changed, you may end up affecting retention.
Michelle, when you do an acquisition, do you move the employees right away? Do you wait a given amount of time? Does it depend on the situation and the environment? What happens?
It absolutely depends on the particular acquisition, and I can give you two examples. I'll give you my very first acquisition I did with Semiconductor, and we acquired a portion of LSI Logic. We acquired their fab in Gresham, Oregon, so all U.S., but we were only acquiring a portion of their business, so we weren't acquiring their benefit plans and their compensation structure or any of that. We were actually hiring people directly to work for us. So obviously immediately they're coming on to our compensation and benefit structure. We did essentially what you would do with any new employee, a full open enrollment, help them enroll in our benefits, they got our 401k plan, etc. They were welcome to roll their 401k over, but they didn't have to. So that was an immediate acquisition and probably the simplest and cleanest that you can have. Now, if we roll forward in time to the most recent acquisition we did, which was Sanyo Semiconductor's division, and we did that in January of 2011, we're still not fully integrated. Okay, so we're in 2013, and certain portions are fully integrated depending on the country we're in, but in Japan, our goal is to be fully integrated by 2014. 3 years later. And that is because of the sheer complexity of the union system and working directly with them and proposing what we're interested in doing and them coming back with their counter proposals and the consensus that you have to reach in Japan and when the meeting times are, because many of the meetings are just about discussion, they're not about decisions. You're working slowly through all those processes and getting pieces in place to move forward. So it can be quite the lengthy process. I'm giving you a 3-year one where they're taking time to integrate. In some cases, it's never fully integrated in compensation and benefits. So our location in Germany, we have 32 employees in Germany, very small. You would think everyone's on the same comp and benefits plan. It's such a small group. Of course they are. No, they're not. The pension plans are all different in Germany because The laws around pension plan closures and mergers are so stringent in Germany, it just wasn't a good cost-benefit analysis to change people all to the same pension plan. So here we are with 32 people and multiple pension plans in the country. So in some cases the answer is going to be it's never going to be fully integrated.
So I think the net of this entire video segment, if I might, Michelle, is that mergers and acquisitions are very complex, and there really isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. You've developed some templates and some resources that you use, but every situation is unique.
That's the best thing to take away from this. Obviously, each one you're going to have to go in and you're going to have to ask questions after questions. You're going to have to gather data. It's good to have the template structure so you don't forget what to ask and so that you know the next steps to take. And especially for a person who's new to mergers and acquisitions, to have that sort of template is very helpful when you're walking into that situation. But understand that each organization is different, each country is different. Even in the United States, each state has different regulations that you have to look at and work around. The most important things to do are obviously to ask a lot of questions, understand why things are done the way they are at the current company. You may learn a best practice through that you want to implement in your own company. Don't make assumptions before you take actions, and communicate as early and as often as possible to have the successful integration of your benefits and at some point integrate that culture.
Terrific advice from Michelle Demetrius from On Semiconductor about how to handle a very active merger and acquisition situation. If your company's going through one, World at Work has some resources available to you. So for WorkSpan TV, I'm Ryan Johnson.